Hello and welcome to an episode that deals with stages of public relations. I'm Swati Singh, teaching as a guest lecturer at Delhi University and other colleges. I'm also working as a corporate trainer and a creative director of an advertising agency. I have an experience of 12 years with media and 8 years in teaching at various North Indian universities. We would be today discussing public relations process and stages. Defining the usage of public relations processes. Defining the proofs of race and rope. Explaining the SMART goal strategy. Deliberating the need and significance of evaluation for public relations process. An introduction. Public relations works best when it's a strategic management function. Strategic public relations are focused on achieving goals and objectives that contribute to the overall purpose and mission of an organization. To be strategic, public relations practitioners need accurate information about the situations they face, the audiences they communicate with, effectiveness of their communication efforts, and the overall impact the program has on building and maintaining relationships with critical stakeholders, without whom the organization could not fulfill its purpose. Public relations practitioners may be tempted to start with tactics such as press releases, a blog, an event, and so on. But these first should be determined by research to help inform the overall goals and strategies of the function. Otherwise, they may be wasted efforts. Constructing the strategic plan for a public relations campaign. This process is primarily composed of 4 steps. Using research to define the problem or situation, developing objectives and strategies that address the situation, implementing the strategies, and then measuring the result of the public relations efforts. Sometimes acronyms such as John Marston's RACE, Research, Action, Planning, Communication, Evaluation, or Jerry Hendricks' ROPE, Research, Objectives, Programming, Evaluation, are used to describe the processes. The 4 steps are: Number 1, use research to analyze the situation facing the organization and to accurately define the problem or opportunity in such a way that the public relations effort can successfully address the cause of the issue and not just its symptoms. Number 2, develop a strategic action plan that addresses the issues that was analyzed in the first step. This includes having an overall goal, measurable objectives, clearly identified public, targeted strategies, and effective tactics. Number 3, execute the plan with communication tools and tasks that contribute to reaching the objectives. Number 4, measure whether you were successful in meeting the goals using evaluation tools. We shall understand these steps by setting an example of an energy company and setting up of a new pipeline by the same. Step 1. Formative research to analyze the situation. The first step in the process is analyzing the problem or opportunity. This involves research, either formal or informal, to gather information that best describes what is going on. Research used to understand the situation and help formulate strategies is called formative research. For example, a natural gas company may be considering the route for a new pipeline. It must conduct research to understand what possible obstacles it might face. Are there any environmentally protected or sensitive regions in that area? Are there strongly organized neighborhood groups that might oppose the project? What is the overall public support for natural gas and transportation pipelines? Additionally, are there acceptable alternatives to the pipeline construction, alternative routes, alternative drilling procedures, alternative construction times? All of these questions should be considered before the first shovel breaks the ground. There are many different methods to collect the data that is needed to fully understand the situation. Analysis of previous news stories about pipelines in this region would give you a good idea about the way this story might be framed by media. Another analysis of blogs and other social media about pipelines would be a good idea. Again, the purpose for gathering the information is to help with understanding the situation using a SWOT analysis. A very popular tool for analyzing situation is the SWOT: strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat analysis. This breaks down a situation by looking at the internal and external factors that might be contributing to the situation before developing a strategy. The internal factors are the strengths and the weaknesses of the organization. The external factors are the opportunities and threats existing in the organization's environment. The first step is to look internally at the strengths and weaknesses of the organization. For example, the energy company may find that it has very strong relationship with members of the media and has good employee morale, is financially sound, and has a culture that values innovation. It may also find that it has weak relationship with environmental groups and neighborhood associations, has a culture that promotes confidence in its decisions, and has dedicated a few resources in the past towards community relations. This information helps inform the possible strategies it needs to take regarding the construction of a new pipeline. The external factors, opportunities, and threats are usually the reasons the organization finds itself in a situation. In this case of the energy company, it sees as an opportunity to drill into a new methane gas deposit and provide that energy to its clients. To the energy company, this appears to be a win-win situation because it can continue to provide energy to meet the demand of its consumers. However, it also needs to assess the possible threats, which includes probable legal actions from opposition groups that could lead to court injunctions. Other threats might include negative coverage of the project by the media, leading to a damaged reputation and lower public support for the project. After conducting the SWOT analysis, you can couple the internal factors with the external factors to suggest possible strategies. SO strategies focus on using organizational strength to capitalize on the external opportunities. ST strategies also use organizational strengths to counter external threats. WO strategies address and improve organizational weakness to be better prepared to take advantage of external opportunities. WT strategies attempt to correct organizational weakness to defend against external threats. Constructing a situation analysis. Once enough data and information has been collected so that you really do understand the core contributing factors and not just the surface conditions, then it is time to write a 2-paragraph statement that summarizes the situation. The first paragraph should redefine the situation using the data collected by your research. Highlight the insights gained through formal and informal research. The second paragraph should identify the problems, difficulties, and potential barriers to resolving the issue. These also should have been identified in the research, and the research also should help you recommend solutions to these barriers. Step 2. Strategic action planning. Strategic plan should be focused on resolving or capitalizing on the situation identified in the problem or opportunity statement. It begins by flipping the problem or opportunity statement into a goal. In the case of the energy company, the goal might be to use communication and actions that improve relationships with key members of the community in order to successfully complete a pipeline that delivers newly found methane gas to customers. Notice that there is room for change with the pipeline plans in the goal statement, which indicates a fair room of adjustment and alterations in the plan. Care should be taken not to write goals that suggest that the public will do something you want them to do, because public cannot be controlled. It might set up the organization for failure. Instead, focus should be on what can be done to achieve the goal, such as communicate and act in such a way that earns the consent or endorsement of these publics. The goal provides the direction for the strategic plan, and objectives provide the direction of specific and measurable outcomes necessary to meet the goal. A good objective meets the following criteria. It should be an end and not a means to the end. It should be measurable. It should have a time frame. And it should identify the public for the intended outcome. End and not means to an end. An objective should be an outcome that contributes to the goal. There are three possible outcomes for these objectives: cognitive, awareness, understanding, remembering; attitudinal, creating attitudes, reinforcing positive attitudes, change negative attitude; and behavior, create behaviors, reinforce positive behavior, change negative behavior. The opposite of these outcome objectives are what Lindemann called output objectives, which are the means to an end. They include the communication effort to reach the objective, such as placement of messages in influential media. These are actually strategies and not objectives. Measurable objectives also help hold public relations professionals accountable for their efforts. Public relations should engage only in strategies and tactics that actually contribute to larger organizational goals. Measurable objectives often require a comparative number, such as 65% awareness of a product or program. An objective cannot be set to increase awareness by 20% if the current level of awareness is unknown. This is why formative research is needed to establish benchmarks. If no such benchmark exists, then it is customary to establish a desired level, such as increase the awareness to 85%. The problem with this is that you do not know how close you are to that figure before the campaign. This might be an easy objective to achieve if your level of awareness is already over and above 85%, or a very difficult one if your awareness level is around 20%. Time frame: when will the objective be met? If there is no time frame specified, then it cannot be accountable. Identify the public. It is a good idea to identify overall objectives before trying them to a public. This helps to think about which public are connected to the objective. However, to make an objective truly measurable, it must identify a public because different publics will be at different levels of awareness, attitudes, and behaviors. The objectives should advance overall business goals such as increase sales, increase share value, retain employees, improve social responsibility, or reduce litigation. They should also be written within the parameters of possible public relation outcome. Generally, there is a hierarchy to the different levels of objectives. Lindemann identified three levels of objectives: output, outtakes, and outcomes. As mentioned previously, output objectives are focused on the effectiveness of the meeting strategies, such as the number of placed messages in the media, the size of the audience that received the message, the percentage of positive message that were contained in the stories, and so forth. This is helpful to measure output objectives because they provide a good indicator of how well the strategy has been implemented. Outtake objectives are focused on increasing awareness, understanding, and retention of the key message point. It is far more important to know that the audience received the message than whether it was sent out. For example, you may send out a message in an employee newsletter that reaches 10,000 employees. You need to be more concerned on the impact that message had than the number of people it reached. Outcome objectives are perhaps the most important but also the most difficult to achieve. Once the goal of the public relations program and measurable objectives have been established, it's time to turn attention to strategies. Strategies provide the means by which objectives are reached. There are certain elements that should be included in this step. First, identify what is trying to be accomplished with each public. Second, segment audiences based on common characteristics. Third, create communication strategies that are focused on the self-interest of the public. And fourth is to identify how public will be reached with messages or actions. Tie strategy to objective. Too often, public relations programs have been primarily tactical and have skipped the strategic step of creating objectives. Public relations professionals are doers and often want to get to the action first. However, too many tactics have been executed because of tradition than because of the strategy. What makes public relations strategic is having the action tied to the real need of the organization. If you come up with a really clever tactic, but it does not help meet any objective, it should be seriously reconsidered. Far too many resources often are wasted on creative tactics and fall short of addressing the need of the issue. At the same time, brainstorming on strategies may lead to a legitimate idea that was not considered during the objective phase, and it may require re-evaluating the objectives. But if a strategy cannot be tied to an essential outcome, then it should not be executed. Segment audiences, all groups within public, should be differentiated based on common characteristics such as demographies, geographies, or psychographies. Demographies include variables such as gender, income, level of education, and ethnicity. Females may be connected to the issue very differently than the males. College graduates may have different attitude than high school graduates. Geographics describe your public by their location. People living within 1,000 feet of a pipeline may have different attitude towards energy companies than those who live a mile or farther from those lines. Psychographics segment your audience based on their values and lifestyle. People who are single, adventurous, drive fast cars, and spend a lot of their income on entertainment may have very different opinion about seat belts than people who have small children, drive cars like Nano, and invest most of their money on securities. It is important to segment your key public because it will help you identify their self-interests. Create communication based on self-interest. People pay more attention to communication that are tied to their values, needs, and goals. You should ask yourself what your public values and cares about. Knowing the demographic, geographic, and psychographic differences of key public, you can create a message that connects them to your program. For example, for young adventurous drivers, you may want to show how seat belts allow them to have more fun by showing how someone on a curvy road stays snug in the seat, whereas someone without a seat belt is sliding around and has less control. Meanwhile, a mother who drives would be more interested in seatbelt safety messages geared towards children. Once the self-interests have been identified, a primary message can be created that will give direction to the communication efforts. These can become slogans if they are clever and effective enough. Choose communication channels. The last element in the strategy is identifying the channel or medium through which you can reach target public. The channel can be mass media, such as newspapers or television or radio programs. They can be transmitted by other mediated channels such as emails, blogs, or Twitter. They can also be open house meetings, mediated slideshows, and face-to-face communication. Sometimes a channel is a group of people, usually opinion leaders such as teachers, scientists, doctors, or other experts. For example, if we wanted to reach parents in our seatbelt campaign, information kits could be sent to teachers to use in classroom with students. These materials could be designed to take home and complete with parents. The messages found in these kits could be supported with billboards and radio, public service announcements, reaching parents while they are driving. Usually, the target audience is reached through multiple points of connect to reinforce the message. So, the following could be one strategy for the seatbelt campaign. Appeal to young parents, concern for family safety through educational material that require interaction between parents and their children enrolled in elementary schools. Often there are several strategies for each public and for each objective. The most creative element in the public planning stage is the tactic. Tactics are the specific communication tools and tasks that are used to execute this strategy. In the case of seatbelt campaign, the tactic could be the element found in the educational kit, such as crossword puzzles, coloring books, or interactive games. They would also be billboards, public service announcements, internet websites, social media applications, and other material. The challenge is to create tactics that cut through the clutter of all the messages competing for the audience's attention. A great deal of brainstorming takes place during this stage to develop the most creative and clever messages, designs, and activities. However, there is also the temptation to get carried away with the creativity and lose sight of the tactic purpose. A cardinal rule is to always evaluate your tactics within established strategies and objectives. Communication implementation, step 3. The best public relation program includes both communication and action. The old adage, action speaks louder than words, is as true for public relations as it is for other business disciplines. Sometimes an organization needs to act or react before it can communicate. For example, if employees are not attending training seminars, it might not be enough to try more creative and persuasive messages. The seminars might need to be more relevant and interesting for the employees, providing something to communicate that might change behaviors. Organizations should not only expect shareholders to behave in a way that benefit the organization. Sometimes the organization needs to change its action and behavior to improve these critical relationships. Two additional components to the public relation process usually are developed during the communication and action stage. First, the planning calendar and the budget. Once the tactics have been determined, it's best to plan the development and execution of tactics using a calendaring tool such as a Gantt chart. A Gantt chart is a horizontal flow of chart that provides a graphic illustration of when tasks should begin and end in comparison to all other tasks. The cost for developing, distributing, and executing the tactics should also be determined. You might want to start with a wish list of all tactics and pare them down to those that will provide the greatest return on investment. Some tactics may fall by the wayside when you project their cost against their potential of meeting your objectives. Step 4. Evaluation according to PINE. 4 concerns should address when evaluating effectiveness of a public relation campaign. Define your benchmark, select a measurement tool, analyze data, draw actionable conclusions, and make recommendations, make changes, and measure again. If you have followed the steps in the public relation process, then you have already identified your audiences and established objectives for each. If your objectives are measurable, then you already have the criteria by which to evaluate the success of your program. If you set the objective of increase awareness by 40%, then a benchmark has been set against which to measure. The benchmark compares your current situation to your past. PINE also recommends comparing the data gathered to other organizations such as key competitors, comparative analysis, which makes data much more relevant. Instead of knowing how much press coverage has been achieved, it can be compared to how much the competition is getting to determine what is called share of voice. Based on this evaluation, the tools that will be best help to measure against the stated criteria are selected. Generally, the same tool that helped establish the benchmark data are used. If primary research was used to establish benchmarks, then the same method are repeated to evaluate success. If you surveyed employees to establish awareness and attitude benchmarks, then a follow-up of survey is the obvious measurement tool. If you use attendance at employee meeting to establish behavior benchmarks, then counting attendance after the public relation program is the appropriate measurement tool. Here, we need to appreciate that even when primary research is most expensive and requires the most expertise, nevertheless, it is the best measure of the real impact of a public relations effort on stated outcome objectives, such as change in awareness, attitudes, and behavior. Probably the most popular evaluation tools used in public relation measures are the output objectives. There are several ways to measure the effectiveness of communication output, but some are better than the others. One of the earliest methods was clip counting. A clip counting is an article, a broadcast story, or online message that mentions a company or product. You can either hire a clipping service or collect your own clips at the end of a predetermined period. The number of clicks obtained is examined. This measure is the most simple and convenient way to measure output and is one way to monitor media coverage. It is also the least informative because you do not know what the clips mean, except that perhaps it has stroked the egos of some senior management by getting their names in the media. Many public relations measurement services will analyze media coverage to evaluate the percentage of articles that contain program key messages, the prominence of the message, of whether it appeared on page 1 versus page 16, in a broadcast, how much time was allocated to the story and where it appears in the program, the tone of the message, positive, neutral, or negative, and how the media efforts compare with key competitors, that is, share of voice. These organizations provide metrics that help establish benchmarks pertaining to program output objectives and strategies. However, to know if these communication actually affected people's awareness, understanding, attitude, or behavior, primary research, such surveys are needed to be conducted. Evaluation and measurement should not take place only at the end of your efforts. You should be monitoring the media constantly to determine whether your message is available for people to see, what advertisers call reach, public relations professionals call opportunities to see, or OTS. If the media strategy is not only working, course corrections in the middle of the program are required, not after the program has been completed. Although sophisticated measures of communication output have been developed over the years, it is still more critical to consider that outtake and outcomes of those messages getting the communication into the various channels, be they traditionally or new media, is only the means to the end of affecting attitudes, opinions, and behaviors. The outcomes need to be measured in order to tie back to organizational goals and purposes. Cost comparison between public relations and advertising messages are not generally used or encouraged as an evaluation tool because of the difficulty in measuring the actual impact of these messages. However, we do know that although public relations and advertising generate the same amount of product awareness, brand recall, and purchase intention, public relations content produces higher level of product knowledge and positive product evaluation than advertising. To measure attitude and opinions, the most popular tool remains the survey. Public opinion polls and attitude surveys can be conducted and compared to benchmarks to determine whether the message and behavior of an organization have had the intended effect. Intentions to behave and preferences for purchasing can also be measured through surveys. Providing some figures on people's inclinations, behaviors can also be measured against benchmarks. Increase in employee retention, increased donations, and improved sales and investments could all be used to measure behaviors. Often, the connection between communication strategy and behavioral changes could be due to other variables. So, it is important to isolate and track the impact of the public relations effort in order to evaluate whether they are the driving force in the change. And now it's time for a quick recap. This module reviewed the process by which strategic public relation efforts are accomplished. The process is very structured. It suggests that formal research can be conducted for formative and evaluative purposes. It requires connecting communication efforts with goals, objectives, and strategies. This process works best with planned efforts such as public relation campaign and should be ingrained if the public relations professional is to become a strategic communicator. This is all we have for you today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. See you again. Till then, thank you and namaskar.